What would you do if you had 60 seconds to decide whether to fire on a ship? And being wrong meant either starting a war or letting weapons reach terrorists? That is not a hypothetical. That is a real decision. It happens in real water, on real ships, made by real people who have been awake for 20 hours and are working with incomplete information. And it happened 25 times in a single week, in one of the most dangerous shipping corridors on Earth. If this kind of deep dive content is what you've been looking for, hit subscribe right now, drop a like on this video, and share it with someone who actually wants to understand how the world works. It takes 2 seconds, and it means everything to a channel like this. Now, let's get into it. Picture the Gulf of Aden. It's a narrow stretch of open water between Yemen and Somalia. Every day, hundreds of cargo ships pass through it. Oil tankers, container ships, bulk carriers. It connects the Red Sea to the Indian Ocean, and it is one of the most strategically important waterways on the planet. About 12% of global trade passes through this region every year. If you've ever bought something that came from Asia, there's a real chance it passed through this water. Now imagine you're a cargo captain. You've been at sea for over 2 decades. You know this route. You've done it dozens of times. And then, in the middle of an otherwise ordinary crossing, your radio crackles to life. A voice comes through, calm and direct. It tells you this is a United States Navy warship. It tells you to cut your engines. It tells you to prepare for boarding. You look at your first officer. He looks back at you. Nobody speaks. What happens in the next 60 seconds will determine everything. This is not a dramatic exaggeration. This is the operational reality of what the U.S. Navy has been doing in the Gulf of Aden at a pace that senior defense officials have quietly described as the highest sustained rate of maritime interdiction the Navy has maintained in this region since the 1990s. 1 destroyer. 25 ships stopped. 7 days. No shots fired. But here's what nobody's explaining. Not the press releases, not the news reports, not the military briefings designed for public consumption. How does this actually work? Not the politics, not the justification, the actual mechanics, the law, the chain of command, the sequence of decisions that unfolds from a Pentagon conference room all the way to a sailor in the dark, in open water, stepping onto a ship he has never seen before. That is what this video is about. Before a single ship gets stopped, before a single radio call gets made, an entire legal and command structure has to be built from the ground up. This part gets almost no attention. People see the headline, Navy stops weapons shipment, and they assume someone in Washington made a phone call and sailors showed up. That is not how it works, not even close. Under international law, specifically the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, a naval blockade or maritime interdiction operation has to meet 4 distinct legal requirements. Miss even one of them, and what you're doing stops being a lawful military operation. Legally, it becomes something closer to piracy. That word is not being used loosely. International law defines piracy very specifically as the seizure of a vessel on the open ocean by a non-state actor for private gain. The line between that and what a navy does is not drawn by intention. It is drawn by legal compliance. And that compliance has to be documented, verified, and defensible in international court before anyone fires up the engines. The 4 requirements are this. You need defined legal authority. You need declared intent, meaning you have to publicly announce what you're doing and why. You need proportionate means, which limits what you're actually allowed to do to a vessel and its crew. And you need a functioning notification system so that ships know in advance that the interdiction zone exists. In the current operations in the Gulf of Aden, that legal authority comes from United Nations Security Council Resolution 2216. It was passed in 2015. It imposed a comprehensive arms embargo on Houthi forces in Yemen, and it authorized member states of the UN to inspect vessels on the high seas if there is reasonable ground to believe those vessels are carrying prohibited weapons or materials. To the Houthi movement, that resolution is the legal keystone of the entire operation, but it comes with limits that matter. It does not authorize the indefinite detention of ships. It does not authorize the seizure of cargo that has nothing to do with the arms embargo. And it explicitly requires that any inspection be conducted with full regard for the safety of the crew. Every decision made on the water has to stay within those lines. The moment it doesn't, the legal foundation collapses. Now trace where the actual order comes from. It does not start on the ship. The commanding officer of a destroyer in the Gulf of Aden does not wake up and decide on his own to start stopping vessels. The order chain begins at United States Central Command, CENTCOM, headquartered in Florida. CENTCOM issues what's called an execute order. This is the document that authorizes a specific military operation. It names the theater, defines the objectives, and sets the boundaries of what is and is not permitted. That execute order is drafted in coordination with military lawyers, reviewed at the deputy commander level, and only then transmitted down the chain. Below CENTCOM sits Naval Forces Central Command, known as NAVCENT. NAVCENT takes the execute order and translates it into something operational. Which ships go where? What the rules of engagement are? What has to be reported, how quickly and to whom, what decisions commanders in the field can make on their own versus what requires approval from higher up. Below NAVCENT sits Combined Task Force 153. This is the multinational naval force specifically built for Red Sea and Gulf of Aden operations. It was formally established in 2022. It includes warships from multiple countries, though the United States provides the primary enforcement capability. The destroyer operating in this zone works within Task Force 153. Its commanding officer typically holds what is called pre-delegated authority. This means certain decisions have already been authorized by higher command. He doesn't call Washington before ordering a boarding. That permission was built into his orders before he left port. What he does do is report every contact, every decision, and every outcome upward through the chain. This structure exists for a reason. In the middle of the ocean, at 2 a.m, with a vessel that isn't responding to radio calls, there's no time for a conference call with the Pentagon. Decisions have to be made in seconds. The command architecture is designed to make those seconds as legally sound and tactically coherent as possible. Here is exactly how an interception unfolds. A vessel enters the operational area. The ship's Combat Information Center, the CIC, picks it up. Veterans of the Navy know this room well. It's dark, it hums with electronics, and it is in a constant state of quiet, focused tension. Radar screens, communication stations, sailors tracking everything within hundreds of nautical miles. The contact gets logged, it gets a track number. If it's running an AIS transponder, the automatic identification system that commercial ships are required to broadcast, that data gets pulled. Course, speed, last known port, registered owner, flag state, all of it gets checked against a database maintained by the Office of Naval Intelligence. If the vessel matches any of the criteria defined in the rules of engagement, the flag it's flying, the cargo type it's declared, anomalies in its route, or a specific entry on the watch list, the officer of the deck initiates what the Navy calls a query. This is the first radio call. It goes out on Channel 16. Every commercial vessel on Earth is legally required to monitor Channel 16 continuously while underway. This is not a technicality. It is a foundational requirement of international maritime law. There is no legitimate reason for a vessel to miss that call. The format of the call is standardized. The vessel is addressed by name if it's known, or by position if it isn't. The warship identifies itself. It requests that the vessel stop, provide identification, declare its cargo, and confirm its destination. Under the legal framework that governs these operations, this is not a request. It is a lawful order. What happens next is where things get complicated. Think about a real case. A Dow-type vessel was intercepted in the Gulf of Aden in late 2023. The radio exchange followed almost exactly the format described above. The warship hailed the vessel 3 times before the captain responded. When he finally did respond, he gave a destination that didn't match the direction the ship was actually heading. He said he couldn't provide cargo documentation verbally, citing language barriers. That response, not openly hostile, not cooperative, inconsistent, evasive, is precisely the kind of situation that commanding officers train for and dread at the same time. The captain wasn't threatening anyone. He also wasn't answering. And when the vessel was eventually boarded, the cargo contained components consistent with Iranian-origin weapon systems. But between that first radio call and that boarding, a very specific sequence of steps had to play out. Because the rules of engagement are not suggestions. They are law. You've made it halfway through this script, and if you're still here, you clearly care about this stuff. Screenshot this video, share it to your story, and drop this channel a subscribe right now. If the vessel doesn't respond to the initial radio call, the warship repositions. An Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer is 509 feet long and displaces over 9,000 tons. When that ship moves to within half a mile and turns broadside, the message is clear. If repositioning doesn't work, the next step is a warning shot across the bow, a round fired from a .50 caliber machine gun directly into the water ahead of the ship. The shot is not aimed at the ship. It is a demonstration of capability and resolve. In the 7-day period where 25 vessels were interdicted, no warning shots were reported. That fact tells you that the presence of the destroyer alone was enough for deterrence, but the rules of engagement go further. The next level is called disabling fire. Disabling fire means targeting the vessel's propulsion system with the intent of preventing its course. This requires explicit approval from the task force commander, one level above the destroyer's commanding officer. And then there is lethal force. Naval doctrine is explicit that lethal force is the last resort. A ship that is running from you does not justify it. A ship that is actively shooting back does. The key principle is proportionality. Every escalation step has to be proportionate to the threat. Now let's talk about what 25 interdictions in 7 days actually means in human terms. The destroyer carries approximately 280 crew members, and the boarding team consists of 8 to 16 sailors. They approach in rigid hull, inflatable boats, and board using hook and ladder systems. The actual limiting factor in a sustained maritime interdiction campaign is people and time. 50 hours of boarding team deployment over 7 days represents a demanding pace. The international law dimension adds yet another layer. Not every ship stopped is flagless. Under Article 1 and 10 of the Law of the Sea, warships can only board under limited circumstances. Every boarding is simultaneously a tactical event and a legal case to be scrutinized for years. Adversaries watch these events to document escalation steps and map the rules of engagement. Find one person who should understand how this world works and send them this video. What happens in the Gulf of Aden is a story about how power actually operates. A commanding officer stands on a bridge with training, law, and human judgment. 60 seconds. Every time. And every time, the world holds its breath just a little.